While I fed our baby, my husband texted, "I'm moving abroad with Elena. Don't call me. I've emptied the accounts." He thought he was free. But he had no idea what was coming. Michael wasn't the kind of man who blended into the background. From the first day we met, there was a fire in his eyes, a kind of determination that made it impossible to look away. He made his intentions clear. He wanted me and he wasn't afraid to show it. At first I resisted. I told myself I didn't need distractions, that men like him came with more promises than follow-through. But Michael was relentless in a way that disarmed me. He learned my favorite coffee order and left it waiting for me before work. He remembered the smallest details, like the book I mentioned in passing or the way I liked to sit by the window when it rained. He didn't just show up, he paid attention. Weeks turned into months, and the harder I tried to keep my distance, the closer he drew me in. And then one evening, when he stood outside my door holding nothing but a single wilted flower he'd picked on his way, his smile tired but hopeful, I finally gave in. I said yes. Yes to dinner. Yes to him. Dating Michael was like stepping into a current that carried me further than I expected. He dreamed big, talked of building a life that seemed larger than reality, and the way he looked at me made me believe it was possible. He said I was the one person who made him feel unstoppable, and in his arms I started to believe it too. Not long after, he proposed. It wasn't with grandeur or spectacle, but with sincerity, his voice unsteady, his hands trembling as he promised me forever. And I said yes, because by then I couldn't imagine a life without him. Marriage wasn't without its storms, but I gave it everything I had. When his first business collapsed and creditors closed in, I sold the small car I had inherited from my father so he wouldn't drown in debt. That night he pulled me close, whispering, "I'll spend my whole life making this up to you." When rejection after rejection came, I stayed up through countless nights, helping him rewrite resumes, encouraging him when he was too tired to believe in himself. And when he finally got his breakthrough, his voice shook as he said, "This isn't just my win, it's ours." I took extra shifts so he could focus on his dreams. I wore the same dress to every formal event so he could stand out in something new. I cooked meals from scraps when money ran dry, hiding my own hunger just so he wouldn't feel like he'd failed me. And in those moments Michael noticed. He would hold my face in his hands, call me his strength, his reason, his anchor. For a long time that was enough. At first the changes were so small I almost convinced myself they weren't real. Michael, who once called me in the middle of the day just to hear my voice, began to silence his phone when I rang. He said he was busy, that meetings ran longer now, that success demanded sacrifice. I wanted to believe him. After all, hadn't I sacrificed everything for him already? He used to look at me with gratitude, his eyes soft whenever I handed him the last plate of food or slipped a few bills into his wallet so he could get to a meeting. But as his world started to grow, the gratitude faded. My sacrifices became invisible. What was once, "I don't deserve you," turned into, "You should understand." I noticed it in the way he carried himself at events. He once introduced me as the woman who held his dreams together, his partner in everything. But slowly the introductions shifted. "I became my wife," said flatly, like a title that ended the conversation. His hand that used to hold mine so tightly now rested loosely, slipping away the moment cameras flashed. When I came home exhausted from double shifts, Michael no longer pulled me into his arms or thanked me for keeping us afloat. Instead, he frowned at the wrinkles in my dress, the tired circles under my eyes, as if my weariness embarrassed him. I told myself he was just under pressure, that success came with stress and that this phase would pass. But the distance grew heavier with every passing day. He started staying out later. At first it was just business dinners, then networking events, and soon there were nights he didn't come home at all. When I asked, his tone shifted from tenderness to irritation. "Don't start, not tonight. You wouldn't understand what it takes to get ahead." The man who once wept in my arms, who once swore he couldn't breathe without me, now looked at me like I was a weight holding him back. And though I stayed silent, I felt the truth clawing at my chest. Michael was no longer the man who had once stood outside in the rain just to see me smile. Something in him was changing, and deep down I knew it wasn't just about work. Just when I thought I was losing him completely, life threw me a twist I hadn't expected. I found out I was pregnant. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, clutching the test in my hands, tears blurring my vision. My heart raced with 100 emotions, fear, hope, and a desperate longing that maybe, just maybe, this was what would bring Michael back to me. Maybe this child could remind him of the love we once built together. That evening I told him. I expected shock, maybe even joy. I expected the man who once dreamed aloud with me to come rushing back. But Michael just froze, staring at me like I had spoken a foreign language. "A baby?" he muttered, as though the word itself was a burden. I nodded, trying to smile, trying to reach for his hand, but he pulled away. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened, not with fear but with something closer to resentment. "Do you have any idea what this will do to me right now?" His voice was low, sharp. "I can't afford this, not now. Everything I've worked for, it'll all slip through my fingers." My heart cracked. I had thought he would see this as a blessing the way I did. Instead he saw it as a threat. From that day Michael's distance became a wall. He avoided me, avoided the subject, and when he did speak of it his words cut deep. "You don't understand how timing works. This will ruin us." I tried to hold on to hope, telling myself he just needed time. I dreamed of holding our child, of maybe seeing the man I loved return when he saw tiny fingers gripping his. But deep down, a fear was growing inside me. A fear that this child I longed for was already unwanted by the one person who should have stood by me most. The weeks that followed were nothing like what I had imagined. I thought pregnancy would bring us closer, that Michael would place his hand over my belly with wonder, that he would whisper promises about the future we were building. But instead I carried the weight of it alone. When I told him I needed to see a doctor for my first appointment, he didn't offer to come with me. "I've got meetings," he said without looking up from his phone. That day I sat in the waiting room surrounded by couples holding hands, husbands whispering encouragement to their wives, and I swallowed the ache in my throat when I realized I was alone. At home the silence between us grew heavier. If I mentioned the baby, Michael's expression would harden. He would cut me off with, "Not now," or, "You're stressing me out." I began to hold my excitement inside, pressing my hand to my stomach at night when I felt a faint flutter, wishing I could share the miracle with him, but knowing he didn't want to hear it. I started to notice the little cruelties. The way he would sigh when he saw me struggling to tie my shoes. The way he looked at my changing body, not with tenderness, but with irritation, as though every sign of life inside me was a reminder of something he never asked for. One night I cooked his favorite meal, hoping maybe it would soften him, maybe remind him of the home we had once built with love. He pushed the plate away after a few bites, muttering, "I'm not hungry." Then without another word he grabbed his jacket and walked out, leaving me sitting at the table with food I could barely swallow through my tears. I lay awake most nights, my hands resting on my stomach, whispering to the life inside me because I couldn't whisper to the man beside me anymore. I told my baby the things Michael never said: "You are wanted. You're loved. I will fight for you." And yet the more I clung to hope, the colder Michael became. His smile vanished completely. His touch disappeared. Even his eyes, once filled with fire when they looked at me, now carried nothing but impatience. It was as if, in his mind, I had betrayed him simply by carrying his child. And though I tried to hide it, I felt myself breaking. Because I wasn't just carrying a baby, I was carrying the crushing weight of a love that was slowly dying. The months passed in a blur of loneliness. Every doctor's appointment I went alone. Every milestone, every small miracle, like the first time I heard the heartbeat or the first time I felt a tiny kick, I carried it silently, holding back tears because the one person I wanted to share it with refused to care. At night, I would sit on the edge of the bed, pressing Michael's hand to my belly when I felt movement, hoping he might feel what I felt. But he always pulled away. "Don't," he would mutter, rolling over to face the wall. It was as if my pregnancy had drawn a line between us, one he refused to cross. When strangers congratulated us in passing, Michael would force a smile, but as soon as we were alone, the mask would drop. "Stop letting people think this is some blessing," he hissed once, his voice low, sharp and cold. This wasn't supposed to happen. And still I endured. I told myself he was just afraid that once he saw our child he would soften, he would remember the love that once bound us. But his absence only grew. He missed the ultrasound appointment where the doctor told me the gender. He didn't notice when I came home late, carrying the little second-hand clothes I had managed to buy. He didn't ask about my cravings, my pains, or my fears. Instead, his life went on as though I wasn't even there. By the last month I could hardly walk without pain, yet Michael never offered his hand. He came home later and later, sometimes with the scent of perfume that wasn't mine clinging faintly to his clothes. When I asked where he'd been, his patience snapped. Don't start. You've done enough already. The night I went into labor, he wasn't home. I remember clutching my stomach, waves of pain ripping through me, fear and panic rising as I realized I was alone. I called his phone again and again, but it went unanswered. Finally, with trembling hands, I dialed a cab and dragged myself to the hospital, praying for strength. Hours later, drenched in sweat and tears, I gave birth to our child. The moment they placed the tiny, fragile body on my chest, I broke completely, not from pain but from love so fierce it swallowed everything else. I whispered promises into the baby's ear, swearing that no matter what, they would never feel unloved the way I had in those months. And then Michael appeared. Not at my side during the agony, not to hold my hand when I thought I might not make it, but only after the cries of our newborn filled the room. He walked in looking annoyed, as though the world had forced him here. He barely glanced at me, his eyes darting to the baby instead, and when he finally spoke, his words weren't joy or wonder. They were a quiet, bitter sigh. So, it's done. The doctor looked at me with pity, the nurses turned their faces away, but I couldn't look at anyone but him. In that moment, I realized the cruelest truth of all. Michael hadn't just abandoned me during the pregnancy. He had abandoned us. The first days after delivery should have been filled with joy, but in our home, they were drenched in silence. I would wake up at night to feed the baby, rocking that tiny body in my arms, humming lullabies through my exhaustion, and Michael would lie in the bed beside us with his back turned, as if our cries weren't even there. When visitors came, he played the part well, smiling faintly, holding the baby just long enough to look like the proud father, telling them how blessed we were. But the moment the door closed, he would hand the baby back like a burden. Take care of it, will you? I have things to do. The word, it, pierced me every time. I begged him to say the baby's name, to acknowledge our child as more than an inconvenience, but he never did unless someone else was listening. He stopped eating at home, claiming long hours and dinners with clients. He no longer looked at me with warmth, only with irritation. My body, still healing and marked by childbirth, seemed to repulse him. One night when I reached for him, hoping for just a fragment of closeness, he pulled away with a scoff. I can't do this right now. Look at you. It was like a knife to my chest. Then came the calls. I noticed them first at night, his phone lighting up with a name he always seemed quick to hide. At first, I told myself it was business, but business calls didn't come with low laughter or sudden silences when I entered the room. Business didn't leave him coming home past midnight, smelling faintly of perfume I didn't own. And still I tried. I clung to hope, to the family I thought we could be. I stayed up late folding baby clothes, writing him notes of encouragement, telling him we could still find our way back. But Michael barely glanced at them, tossing them aside like scraps. The baby's cries seemed to irritate him most. When I rocked our child in the living room late into the night, he would storm out of the bedroom, his voice sharp and cold. Can't you shut it up? Do you know how hard I work? I can't deal with this. I wanted to scream that it wasn't this. It was us, it was him, it was the fact that he was no longer the man I married. But instead I swallowed my words, rocking the baby tighter, whispering, "You have me. You'll always have me." And yet, the cracks couldn't be hidden forever. His absences grew longer, his excuses thinner. One afternoon, while folding his laundry, I found a restaurant receipt tucked in his jacket pocket. 2 glasses of wine, a dinner for 2. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my hands trembling. He had told me that night he was working late. When I confronted him, his eyes flashed with anger. "Don't go through my things. Don't start accusing me." He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. That night, as I lay in bed with the baby cradled against me, I realized the truth I had been refusing to face. Michael was no longer just distant. His heart was already reaching for someone else. And though I didn't yet know her name, I could feel her shadow pressing against the walls of my home, stealing the man who had once sworn I was his everything. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that should have been filled with laughter, the baby gurgling in the crib, sunlight spilling through the windows. I had made lunch, hoping maybe, just maybe, we could sit together like a family. Michael barely touched his food. He scrolled on his phone, his lips twitching with faint smiles he hadn't shown me in months. I watched him, my chest tight, and finally asked, "Who are you always texting?" He didn't even flinch. He just said flat, "No one." But then his phone buzzed again, and before he could snatch it up, I saw the name flash across the screen. Elena. For a second the world went silent. My hands froze around the spoon, my heart stopped, and I felt my throat close. Michael's eyes flickered with panic just for a moment before hardening into cold defiance. He locked the screen, shoved the phone in his pocket, and said, "Don't look at my phone again." The air between us turned to glass, sharp and ready to shatter. "Elena," I whispered, the name burning like acid on my tongue. "Who is she, Michael?" His jaw tightened, his silence louder than any confession. I pressed harder, my voice trembling but fierce. "Tell me the truth. After everything I've given up for you, after this baby, do I not even deserve the truth?" And then he slipped. His anger broke through his careful walls. He slammed his hand against the table, his eyes blazing. "You were never enough. Do you understand that? Nothing you've done has ever been enough. Elena makes me feel alive again, something you could never do." The words hung in the air, jagged and unforgiving. My breath caught, my chest heaving as the baby stirred in the crib at the sound of his voice. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized the man standing before me was no longer the one I had married. He had already given himself away, to her, to someone who hadn't carried his child, who hadn't sacrificed years of her life for him. And yet, in his fury, he had revealed more than he intended. Because in that moment I saw it in his eyes. The guilt, the weakness, the obsession he couldn't control. He wasn't just with Elena. He was drowning in her, using her as an escape from the life he had built with me. But what he didn't know was that by admitting it, by slipping so carelessly, he had handed me the very weapon I needed to undo him. After that slip there was no going back. Michael didn't bother to pretend anymore. The late nights turned into entire weekends gone. He stopped eating at home completely, stopped asking about the baby, stopped looking at me altogether. When he was there he was colder than ever. If I tried to speak, his eyes stayed glued to his phone. If I pressed him, he snapped, "Don't start. I don't owe you explanations." But life has a way of peeling back the lies. I began hearing whispers from people who had seen him out. Dinners with Elena, her hand on his arm, his laughter ringing out in places he had once only gone with me. The same restaurants where we had made memories were now playgrounds for their affair. And yet, for all his bravado, cracks began to show. He looked restless, drained. His temper grew shorter, snapping even at Elena in public when he thought no one was watching. One evening, while picking up the baby's medication at the pharmacy, I overheard two women whispering. "That's Michael, isn't it? The one who left his wife for that woman?" I heard his business partners are furious. "He's been distracted, missing deadlines." It hit me then. Elena wasn't saving him. She was consuming him. The man who once had control over everything was losing it all because of her. And then the text came. I was feeding the baby when my phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen, and for a moment my heart leapt foolishly, thinking maybe, just maybe, he was coming home. But the words nearly split me in two. "I'm leaving. Moving abroad with Elena. Don't call me. Don't ask for help. I've emptied the accounts. You'll figure it out." That was it. 9 years of sacrifice, of loyalty, of building his dreams alongside mine, ended in 4 short lines. He didn't even say my name. He didn't even say goodbye. I stared at the message until the letters blurred with my tears. My hands trembled as the baby whimpered against me, and I whispered, "It's just us now. Only us." Michael thought he had freed himself, that Elena was his new beginning. But what he didn't realize was that he had set fire to his own life, and one day, those flames would come for him. And when they did, I wouldn't even need to strike a match. First I broke. His words crushed me in ways I can't explain. Nights blurred into mornings of tears, exhaustion, and an ache so deep it felt permanent. But grief has a way of hardening into something sharper, something colder. My pain became my weapon, and I decided Michael wasn't going to write the ending of my story. I would. The first thing I did was make sure he could never hurt me financially again. He had emptied the accounts, but I still knew his weaknesses better than anyone. Michael loved appearances. He loved to look wealthy, powerful, untouchable. That vanity was my opening. I gathered receipts, literally. Every extravagant dinner he had claimed as business, every personal expense he had written off through his company, every shady deal he had boasted about late at night when he thought I wasn't listening. I built a quiet arsenal of proof. Not to destroy him immediately, but to keep tucked away, a silent blade he never knew hovered over his head. Then I rebuilt myself. I took on work, side hustles, anything to keep food on the table. I reached out to people he had burned bridges with, offering my skills, my determination, my loyalty, the very things Michael had mocked. Doors that would have stayed closed for me as his wife began to open once I stood on my own. And I made sure the right people saw it. Every gala, every event he once dominated, I attended. Not in desperation but in strength. With the baby on my hip and my head held high, I became the story whispered about behind champagne glasses. That's his wife, the one he abandoned. Look at her now. Michael? His cracks widened. Abroad with Elena, he lost focus. Business ventures collapsed. Old partners pulled out. The money that had once seemed endless began to dry up. And while he drowned, I thrived, earning invitations, forging partnerships, creating a life so solid it no longer carried his name. That was my revenge. I became everything he said I couldn't without him. But I didn't stop there. When the whispers of his downfall grew louder, I released the first blade from my arsenal. Quietly, discreetly, I let his former investors see the receipts. The dinners, the false claims, the fraud. It was enough to spark investigations, enough to strip away what little reputation he still clung to. And I never had to put my face to it. Michael had chosen Elena. Michael had abandoned his family. Michael had left me broken and penniless. But in the end, Michael destroyed himself, with my silence guiding the fall. The final piece of revenge came one night months later when my phone buzzed again. His name lit the screen. Against my better judgment, I opened the message. I made a mistake. She's gone. Everything's gone. Please. Let me come home. I stared at those words for a long time, the same way I had stared at the message where he had left me. But this time there were no tears, no trembling hands, no whispered promises. Only silence. Because the cruelest revenge wasn't destroying him. It was thriving without him. And he would have to live with the knowledge that I was untouchable now, while he had nothing left but the ruins he built with his own hands. I thought the message would be the end. A final, pitiful cry from a man who had thrown everything away. But Michael wasn't done humiliating himself. One rainy evening there was a knock at my door. I almost didn't answer. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe the cruel part of me that wanted to see him suffer, made me open it. And there he was. Michael stood in the downpour, drenched, shivering, nothing like the man who had once walked into every room believing he owned it. His suit was wrinkled, stained, and hanging loose on a frame that looked thinner, worn down. His eyes, once sharp with arrogance, were red, hollow, desperate. "Please," he whispered, water dripping from his hair into his eyes. "Please just let me in." I didn't move, didn't step aside. The baby stirred in the background and Michael's gaze darted past me, softening as he caught sight of the child he had abandoned. His lips trembled. "She used me," he said hoarsely, his voice cracking like glass. "Elena, she took everything. The money, the business connections, even the apartment. I thought she loved me, but she loved the lifestyle. And when it was gone, so was she." His hands shook as he reached for me, but I stepped back, forcing him to drop them at his sides. His desperation poured out in words, frantic, unpolished. "I was blind. I was stupid. I traded you, us, for nothing. You were the one who stood by me, who sacrificed for me. And I threw it all away. Please, please let me see the baby. Please let me fix this. I don't care what it takes. I just..." His voice broke completely. For the first time, Michael couldn't finish a sentence. And I stood there, calm, composed, untouchable. I thought of every night I had cried alone. Every meal I had skipped so the baby could eat. Every sacrifice, every humiliation, every ounce of strength it took to crawl out of the hole he left me in. And now here he was, begging on the same doorstep where I had once begged him to stay. "You chose her," I said quietly. "And she chose herself. Now live with it." His face crumpled, anguish twisting his features, but I didn't soften. Not this time. I closed the door, the lock clicking into place as his fists hit the wood once, twice, before silence swallowed him. I held the baby close, heart steady, lips unshaken. Because that was the final revenge. Not the receipts I'd exposed, not the world watching his empire crumble, not even Elena draining him dry. The real revenge was this moment. Michael on the other side of the door, broken, empty, forgotten. And me on this side, whole, thriving and free. But that night at my door wasn't the end. Michael couldn't let go. He started small, emails that filled my inbox at midnight, apologies tangled with excuses. I wasn't myself. I was lost. I need my family back. I deleted them without replying. Then came the calls. At first once a week, then every day. Sometimes he was calm, begging softly. Other times he was angry, accusing me of turning the baby against him, of being cold. Each voicemail ended the same way, his voice breaking, whispering my name like it could still save him. But I never answered. He showed up at events too. The same galas he used to dominate, now he lingered at the edges trying to catch my eye. I'd see him across the room, disheveled in a suit that no longer fit, his smile forced, his charm gone. When our gazes met, I didn't even flinch. I turned away, letting him drown in the whispers of people who once respected him. She rebuilt without him. Look at her now. She didn't just survive, she thrived. The man who had once believed I couldn't exist without him now lived in the shadow of my existence. Every success I achieved, every time I walked into a room with my head held high, was another blade twisting in the wound he had carved for himself. Michael? He kept sinking. His ventures failed. His friends disappeared. The woman he destroyed me for had left him penniless and alone. All he had left was regret. But regret doesn't heal. Regret doesn't rebuild. Regret doesn't erase the nights I cried myself to sleep, or the child he abandoned without a thought. So, every time his number flashed across my phone, every time his hollow eyes followed me at a distance, I let silence answer him. Because silence was louder than any revenge I could ever plan. And Michael would spend the rest of his life haunted by it, knowing that I was untouchable now, while he was nothing but the ruins of the man he used to be. Love without respect will destroy you. You can give someone your years, your loyalty, even your body, but if they do not respect you, it will never be enough to keep them. Sacrifice is powerful, but it must be mutual. One-sided sacrifices don't build love, they build chains. If you are the only one giving, sooner or later you will lose yourself. A child does not bind a man, it reveals him. How a man treats you during your most vulnerable moments, especially during pregnancy and parenthood, exposes his true character. Betrayal is painful, but it is also a teacher. Michael leaving broke me, but in the ashes of that heartbreak I discovered my strength. Sometimes the ones who wound us the deepest push us toward our greatest growth. Silence can be the loudest revenge. I didn't need to scream, I didn't need to fight, I didn't need to chase him. My healing, my success, and my peace became the answer he could never escape. Karma doesn't need help, it just needs time. Elena drained him, life exposed him, and his empire fell without me lifting a finger. Life always finds a way of balancing the scales. Your worth is not tied to someone else's love. Michael's rejection made me realize that my value never depended on whether he stayed or left. My worth was mine all along. Thriving is the sweetest revenge. In the end, my strength, my independence, and the life I built without him were more powerful than anything I could have plotted.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories.